What's going on, everybody? This is Moose and Chris here from OccupyFantasy.com. Chris, how's it going, man?
It's going well. Wouldn't be an Occupy Fantasy Best Ball Stream Moose without some technical difficulties getting these shows started. We are notorious for that at the beginning of every single show that we have. But happy to be here talking about the 2023 NFL season once again here on the channel. We've been doing best ball streams 2 to 3 times a week here since, I want to say the beginning of April. It's been quite a ride here. And I know between Chuck and Brian and myself, we have started to really formulate a lot of thoughts on which players we like because we've got each got a few dozen drafts under our belt here. Chuck significantly with the most. Brian's, I think, leapfrogged me a little bit. Moose, I know you've done a handful of contests. I think today the plan on the agenda is I'll do a draft here in Best Ball Mania 4. And I guess, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on the 2023 NFL season, because I think this is the first show for this season you and I have done together here.
Yeah, this is the first show that we've done. It's always weird. I've always had the strategy of use the tournaments early on because we don't have a lot of data. We don't have a lot of information. Training camp hasn't started to kind of really know what's going on. And I've always been a little bit more conservative on things like that. So I'd rather wait closer to the season, maybe early August. Like I know once August picks up, I'll probably have Best Ball Mania maybe maxed out, if not pretty close. But I've been doing at least 1 or 2 drafts a week just to keep my skills up to date, keeping up with some of the trends that's going on. So hopefully I can leapfrog you all at the end.
I've got about 20. I think this is my 24th draft I just jumped into here, Moose. We've got the 4th overall pick here. Looks like we've got a good draft room. Only one badge user in here. So
Okay.
hopefully we get some interesting things falling to us. At 4th overall, it does look like I'm going to have a choice to make as long as things go the way that they normally do between players like Christian McCaffrey, Cooper Kupp, and Tyreek Hill. And I will say, as long as he does not go ahead of my spot here, Moose, I am most interested in Cooper Kupp in this range of the first round.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the ADP tracker that we have here on Occupy, that's what I'm having up on the other screen over here. I think in every draft except for one, I've done Kupp over Hill, just because we're trying to get so much correlation, especially in the playoffs. Look at who they're playing against. It's like, oh my God, can I really do that much Miami and their opponents for the playoffs? Where, let me just pull it up again really quick. It's like Jets, Baltimore, Dallas. The way the ADP works, hard to kind of get those the good guys early on. But with Cooper Kupp, I have an unusual amount of Commanders players. So, yeah, I love Kupp.
Now, Kupp is great. We're going to be very, very happy to get a lot of exposure to him in this tournament for sure. And there is a matchup with the Commanders in that first week of the fantasy playoffs. So obviously I am going to be thinking about players like Terry McLaurin, Antonio Gibson, Brian Robinson, Jahan Dotson, maybe even Sam Howell late in this draft. Other players that are interesting to pair with Kupp here, Moose, New Orleans Saints in semifinals week, and then the New York Giants in championship week, the ever important finals week 17. So I think a couple of options to get my highest upside championship week pairing with Kupp here. It would either be Saquon if he's still on the board in round 2 when it comes back around to me, or I am very high on their tight end, who I think is probably going to be their leading receiver this year, Darren Waller, in the round 7 range is when it looks like he goes. So that's kind of where my head is at as I begin a draft and select a player like Cooper Kupp or really any of these players in the beginning of the draft. That's why we've developed the Stack Seeker tool on OccupyFantasy.com. All of our best ball stuff on the website right now, absolutely free. Don't even need to be a subscriber to our website. So please feel free to take advantage of it. It's really, I mean, I'll let you speak to it, Moose. You had a big hand in putting it together, but I love the visualization of being able to see which opponents my players have as I'm trying to build out a roster.
Yes, exactly. And so basically what it is we have 2 things. One that shows just the ADP and how that's changed over the week. But then the Stack Seeker, which Chris is talking about, is fantastic. It has every player with their ADP, but their week 15, 16, 17 opponent, and you can filter by the teams. So what I actually do is the player I pick first, we pick Kupp. I'm putting in Rams. I'm putting in New Orleans, Giants, Washington. In a secondary screen, I do those players' opponents because in the case of, oh, we can't find any direct correlation, well, maybe there's like a secondary stack that, I have 2, 3 tabs open with different groups of teams
Mhm.
that if I need to pick, I can just pick from that. And it's pretty awesome.
No,
And I
that
love that.
that's
Yeah.
you
Go
hit it
ahead.
right on the head because I do the exact same thing. I love being able to see, I know Brian calls it that spider web of opponents that all these players have. We definitely want to maximize correlation throughout the 18 picks that we have here on Underdog, not just in Best Ball Mania 4, but in really any contest that we can play that they offer. And there are quite a few of them.
And yeah, and this is kind of a like I don't want to say like a thing that I like to use a lot is we also have the ADP round as well. It's hard to visualize for me at least if I see someone who is ADP 144. It's a lot of mental memory with the 30-second pick. What round is that? Can I wait this round? Can I reach
Mhm.
for him? And so if I see these 4 players that are in this stack, ADP round 4 or something. Oh, I don't have to reach for any of them. I know I'm going to get hopefully one of them. But if there's a group and you know you're not going to be able to get them in 2 rounds, you got to reach for them now if that's what you want to do. So it's good to have the ADP round in there as well.
Yeah, especially when you're building out a stack, because it definitely
Yeah.
clues you in on when you're going to run out of time to select someone that you're looking to prepare with your players you've already selected here. Coming up on another pick, let's see how things shake out. We're not going to say the names of players that we're targeting because that is the curse here, and we'll have to tilt and make another pick here. But I do feel like I'm going to have a couple of options that fall to me here. That
Yeah.
was one of them I was considering. Olave with the Saints, the Rams having a Week 16 game with the Saints,
Mhm.
but that's all right. There are other Saints players on the board, and I will say I actually have quite a bit of exposure already in my portfolio this year to Chris Olave, so my feelings aren't
Mhm.
too hurt about missing out on him here.
Yeah, I was actually talking to that with another group chat. Is let's say if in theory, you're playing multiple drafts, you're going to get the same. Generally speaking, ADP is not changing too much in these first 2 rounds. Are you comfortable with, let's say, if you get the variance and you get a lot of, pick 4s, 5s, and you always end up with Olave based off how it's working? Are you okay with that, or are you just deviating, saying, I have too much Olave, I'm going to pick Waddle this time, just because, just to lower my exposure?
I think just because I have the goal of drafting a lot of teams this year, Moose, that I'm kind of feeling like I want to just draft my optimal roster every time it
Mhm.
falls to me, because it's not always going to fall to me, right? So,
Yeah.
had Olave made it here, I think I would have selected him. As it turns out, I am going with Saquon Barkley to get the most upside, I think, here with Rams Giants right out of the
There we
way to
go.
start my contest here. And I've got a couple of different routes I can go now. I could still get Waller, and I could actually go with the reverse correlation with Cup and have him be the bring back on the New York Giants side if I want to take Daniel Jones on this roster, or I can go and build out the Rams. The nice thing I think about this
Mhm.
particular game in Week 17, Moose, is that outside of these 2 players I've just selected, everybody else is pretty cheap to acquire in the drafts. They're not going to go until much later in the contest here.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'm looking here. You have one person going in round 4, one in round 6, 2 round 7 with our stack seekers, and then a lot more after that. So it's always interesting though to have that. It's like, okay, well, what do I do in these middle rounds? If you only have one person that you can pick that round, and he gets sniped, how are you kind of handling? What do I go to now? Do you go to that second tab of your tritary opponents and
I think that's why it's most important to do exactly what we talked about at the top of the show, is look at that map of opponents in the playoff weeks.
yeah.
That's usually what I do when I'm scrambling. I try to have a couple of different players in mind for the
Mhm.
pick that I have coming up. I guess, for example, here in round 3, nothing too specific correlating with the Rams or the Giants standing out to me. So this is a
Yeah.
situation where I may lean like just best player available. I do like hitting wide receivers pretty heavily at the beginning of drafts, but I
Yeah.
don't love what is left here. So I'm just kind of thinking through my options. I only have 30 seconds to make a decision now. I feel pretty good about having Saquon as my leading running back here. So I'm going to do something a little off the beaten path today, and I'm going to take Mark Andrews
Okay.
here. I'm not going to worry about tight end really until the end of this draft now by doing that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it makes sense because you're getting an elite tight end. It could be one of those positions where If he just blows up and just crushes like he always does, then that's great. And that's one less position that you can have to worry about. If you have 3, 4, 5 mediocre low end tight ends, that's 1, 2, 3, 4 players that you could have more on correlation side overall help you out during the playoff weeks.
Yeah, I'm not super high on a lot of the receivers in the next round here. I love
Mhm.
Terry McLaurin in general. I've drafted a lot of him this year. Jerry Judy, I've started to come around on, but this Calvin Ridley, Debo Samuel tier is not, as Debo comes off the board. I don't have a ton of these guys. I have Amari a little bit. So I guess what I'm saying here is I'm okay with skipping over these guys when I'm not specifically angling for a stack that involves any of them. And I preferred Andrews to reaching for one of these quarterbacks here. I feel like I am going to be able to get away with either Stafford or Daniel Jones today. So that was where my head was
Mhm.
at there. A little bit of outside chance that maybe I can get the Andrews stack in round 4. Not super likely though. I do think that's going to come off the
Yeah.
board pretty quickly here.
Yeah. That's you mentioned Ridley. Did you say that was some guy that you were high on? You had a lot of
Um,
exposure or no?
I can't bring myself to click on him. In fact, I think I still have
Me
0%
neither.
Calvin Ridley. I like Christian Kirk a lot. Ridley, very, very talented player. I'm just not sure how he's going to fit into Doug Peterson's plans in this offense, which already looked very, very, very strong last season, Moose. And we know Ridley's a
Yeah.
great player, but after more than a full year out of the NFL, because remember in 2021,
Mhm.
he separated himself from the Falcons pretty early in that season. This obviously different positions, but this feels very similar to the long extended absence Deshaun Watson had with Cleveland and maybe being a little
Yeah.
rusty when he comes back to pro football.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, just looking at the ADPs around it, I mean, unless if you're playing for correlation, totally makes sense. I understand if that's what you're doing, but I mean, I'm so much more higher. All the other wide receivers in that same round, Metcalf, Debo Samuel, Amari Cooper, Keenan Allen. I think those all have way higher ceilings than Ridley and on better teams. So I also don't have any exposure to Ridley as well. My lineups.
And as Lamar comes out, that's all right. That was a little lower on my priority list. I'm honestly fascinated to hear some of your player takes, and I'm glad that we agree on being a little, I guess, below consensus on Calvin Ridley here. You are the architect and have a lot of your fingerprints all over our daily fantasy sports model for NFL contests. So I know we don't specifically have a model here for season long contests like Best Ball Mania, and I'm certainly not asking you to give away all of the secrets of the trade. But if you were putting a model together for something like this,
Mhm.
like I guess when you say I'm lower on Calvin Ridley, are you coming at it from the perspective of that if you built out a tool that he probably wouldn't be pretty high on that, or is that just kind of more of a gut take for you at this point?
It's one of those things where NFL is a sport where it's kind of news based, kind of model based as well. I'm personally from the like my own personal take of being so far away from the NFL. It's hard to go back to uh, being an NFL caliber superstar in round
Mhm.
3, round 4, 5, 6. Maybe I could justify it, but I know that if I build a model and there would be some weights in it as well, he would be lower than every wide receiver that I mentioned in round 3. I just know that for a fact, based off kind of the stuff that we've done with modeling and regressions and stuff like that. Um, it's just too much unpredictability for a round 3 take, I think.
And as Scary Terry goes 41, Moose, I can tell you when Chuck and I started doing these drafts at the beginning of our stream season here, he was going in like the 5th, 6th round. So I think the field has finally realized the upside there with McLaurin. Unfortunately for me, because that was who I did want here in this spot.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right.
that's always tough. So who are you thinking about taking now?
Well, I don't want to say the player name before I'm on the clock, but I am thinking about my portfolio a little bit and trying to get more of certain players that I am lower on. Travis Etienne was not one of
Mhm.
them. I'm really intrigued by Mike Williams and the Chargers. Took him in a
Ooh,
contest
okay.
earlier today when I actually built out a little bit of a Chargers stack, and obviously only having Cooper Cup at wide receiver, I do feel like I need to address that position here. So that is why Mike Williams is
Mhm.
joining the squad this afternoon. Got some matchups I think I can still correlate with. The Chargers primarily playing the Denver Broncos in week 17. And there are a few Denver Bronco players I feel like we've talked about in the last few shows that we can target. So I'm okay with that.
Yeah. So in this case, right, we didn't for the last 2 rounds, we didn't get the guy we wanted. So lack of correlation there. Are you now trying to say in your mind, well, let me just try and get any correlation between any of these players, or are you saying I just drafted these two players as one-offs? I'm going back to correlation, mega stacking, all that
Yeah, I
stuff.
think it's the latter. I've got my own personal rankings that I work off of based off of
Hmm.
ADP. And I feel like we're early enough in the draft here, Moose, where I can still find the correlations a little later on in the contest. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the perspective that I'm coming at this from. All right, we do need to make a pick here. I love Chris Godwin. I don't have a
Okay.
real reason to prioritize him here that's readily apparent, but here's where the correlation comes in. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers play the New Orleans Saints in week 16, and I still need to make sure I get a Saints player for correlation with Cooper Kupp. So I'm just kind of
Yeah.
building that out early here and this is why it's important to have those matchups sort of in mind as you're building your roster out, because I know that it's my goal to get a Saint player at some point, missed on Olave, but I'm still going to come back to that at some point in this contest here.
Oh, absolutely. And I think using a seeker or whatever tool you use or a mental note, even if like for the tritary opponents, sometimes I'll literally just have a sticky note. I'll just put it on in front of my computer with teams, alphabetical order, and I'm just like, okay, oh shit, the person I wanted to got sniped. Well, let me just look, compare ADP. Does any of these teams at all match what's on here instead of clicking through 3, 4 different tabs? Like a kind of like
Mhm.
like a last ditch effort. What can I do here to salvage some sort of correlation? If not, then I just pick some of the whoever is best there. We already have Mark Andrews, so I wasn't really feeling the tight end. Uh, I'm always more towards drafting running back, wide receivers more than
Mhm.
running backs early on. So I like the
No,
pick.
100%. Because once these like top 24 running backs, top 36 or so wide receivers are gone, the
Hmm.
ceiling is really capped at what you can find at those positions. I have come around on maybe saving at least some of my quarterback tight end position players that I'm looking for later in the draft, because it just feels like we're more likely to get players that are going to enter our starting lineups in the second half of the draft from those positions. We're on the same page there. As I guess he came up a little behind ADP here, but I know I've got our resident Bengal fan on the show here today, so I do want to ask you how you're feeling about this. Joe Mixon going 56th overall. He was going around pick 70 a month or so ago. So obviously he's risen quite a bit, but there's a lot of uncertainty there with Mixon and his contract situation. How are you feeling about the beloved Joe Mixon from your Cincinnati Bengals this season?
Not feeling good about it. And one of my highest exposed players from like the super last rounds are the Bengals backup running backs. And in the case of something doesn't get done, he doesn't have good work ethic, and they have to bring him out of third downs, all anything like that. This is kind of like the news based kind of thing.
Right.
I'm not feeling very good about the contract talks. Let's draft some of the backups. With the last couple of picks, it doesn't necessarily matter. You can throw these dart picks, hope they land. One of them lands. That's how you get the $3 million. And so yeah, I'm definitely pretty bullish. I guess I never
No,
remember which one. I
no,
don't do the
it
stock market.
definitely, it would definitely be bearish on Mixon. I understand what you're
Yeah,
saying here
bearish,
for
yeah.
sure, Moose. And I have taken quite a bit of Mixon, but I do understand what you're saying here. So to be explicit for people that aren't up on the news here, the Bengals want Joe Mixon to take a pay cut, and he has to agree to that. It seems like that is going to be a pretty big decision point for the Bengals as they enter training camp here. Obviously, Moose, if they end up parting ways with Joe Mixon, that is going to be a massive sea change in ADP. We're going to see the backup running backs for the Bengals, the rookie Brown, maybe Travion Williams, Chris Evans, obviously start to get picked significantly higher if that happens. So that is like one of these news-based scenarios we're discussing here to be aware of. And I will say that's why at this point I'm mostly passing on Joe Mixon unless he falls. I'm fine with
Yeah.
taking some value, but I'm not reaching to take him early. All right. We are in the sixth round at the very nice pick number 69.
There we go.
Um, I don't have any of this player yet, but I needs the correlation. I missed on Scary Terry, and he proved to be a touchdown machine last year. Jahan
Mhm.
Dotson with your Commanders, Moose.
Yes.
Again, trying to kind of expand my portfolio a little bit. I guess I'm talking myself into the idea that a player that correlates with my roster is something that I should prioritize in a range. So I don't necessarily like Dotson's upside more than, let's see, in this range from a raw fantasy point perspective. Like, I like Gabriel Davis with the Buffalo Bills probably a
Yeah.
little better than Jahan Dotson in a vacuum. But the correlation is what I think is going to power me to success in this massive tournament here. So that's what I'm focusing on.
Yeah, makes sense. And speaking of the Commanders, I think I am going to try and go to a couple of their training camps just to get some feet on the ground, get some little news and notes that may creep through. Doesn't come show up on Twitter. That I think if you can do that, and if you're worrying about like you see, you get a Commander stack, maybe those little tidbits at the end, wide receiver 3, 4, 5s. Oh, I think he can actually do well. He did really good in training camp a couple times I went. That right there also can be very beneficial.
A lot of wide receivers off the board right after I pick here. Back
Oh
to
wow.
me, I still only have the one running back in Saquon Barkley here, and I will say I'm okay with waiting once again. I think this is just
Yeah.
another matchup that I don't necessarily have a real reason on the board to select Gabriel Davis Moose, but I know I can get some Patriots later in this contest that I like,
Hmm.
and that'll give me just another Week 17 game that I'm exposed to in a high upside spot. So yeah, that's kind of why I was on Davis here. Got 5 wide receivers early, and I know a lot of people, if you're new to watching shows from us on Best Ball anyway, I tend to really hammer wide receiver early. I just don't think the ceiling is there with players at this position in the second half of contests. So I usually double
Hmm.
back and fill out my other positions after I go pretty heavy at wide receiver. That's sort of what I have started to do over the last few years in these types of contests.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much
I
good. Hit it on the head there.
um,
I was looking and some of my exposures and Patriots. Yeah, I actually have an unusual amount of Patriots as well.
They're all extremely cheap, and obviously, I am from the Boston area, so I'm not being fully a homer, but they do have a really nice matchup there with the Bills in Week 17. It's obviously way
Yeah.
too early for these numbers to be out, but the sports books, the odds makers, I'm sure Patriots Bills is going to be one of the higher total games that week if the Bills offense is what we think it is, right? So have
Yeah.
that stuff in mind as well, thinking about championship week. I know it's disgustingly early to be talking about football that will take place, I think, on New Year's Eve this year. But that's what you have to have in mind when you're drafting for a contest like this.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if anything, it just gives you a reason to talk to the group chat. Say, hey guys, what do you think about the week 15 matchup? What do you think about this? What do you think the total is going to be week 16 for Jacksonville? Like,
And all your buddies are like, you are a psychopath because that is what they do with me. But that is all right. That's why we are here for these types of discussions throughout the rest of the summer. Um, all right. I think I've got a little bit of time until I come back around. This is a new thing I know for you, and I know for Brian to
Mhm.
really be focusing on building content for Best Ball. Obviously, we were very, very excited about the opportunity when Underdog approached us to start providing this for everybody this year, Moose. And I've talked to
Yeah.
Brian about his thoughts on that. But I guess when you learned we were going to be doing Best Ball shows this year, what were you sort of, and from a data perspective, most excited about as far as like digging into this and looking at, I guess, offering content from a different perspective, right? We usually focus on like the weekly stuff. This is a completely
Yeah.
different animal altogether.
Yeah. And so it's interesting because again, normally we work on things in a time box this week, or in a daily sports daily. But now we're talking about things that happen months over. And so, for example, I'm keeping track of like the historical ADP. And so it's really cool to visualize and see some of the charts of some of these players who have dropped, 30, 40 spots and saying, oh, news broke. I wonder how it's going to affect so and so player after 2 weeks. And you just like you see the chart go down or go up. So just kind of keeping track, seeing what the public's doing with different players, different teams. Really like to see that, kind of see what teams that teams are high on, teams are low on. Really, and it's really fun data that Underdog's giving us.
one of the things that has been ingrained in my mind from doing weekly stuff here for a few years now together is that the position that is most likely to see players just skyrocket to the top of the rankings on a weekly basis is the running back. If you get a injury for
Yeah.
to the starter and the backup becomes the starter on short notice, they're likely to get that 25 to 30 touches that week. And every
Yeah.
week it feels like we are touting a running back that is going to be a really strong play that no one was thinking about before the season even started. So that is, I guess, the major reason, Moose, in my mind, why I go very wide receiver heavy early, because
Hmm.
I like these RB2s, these ambiguous backfield situations, because we don't know the answers to the test just yet, Moose, but we do know that
Yeah.
someone here is going to be a good play. And that is why I am more than okay waiting on these running backs until the later part of the draft. Javonte Williams is coming off of a brutal knee injury last year, but should have a really good chance to be the starting running back for the Denver Broncos, competing with Samaje Perine from previously from your Cincinnati Bengals. I think that's why Williams' ADP is a little lower here. People feel like it's going to be kind of hard for him to come back, at least in the beginning of the season, from that knee injury.
Hmm.
But now that I am sort of looking to build out my running back room a little bit, I'm more than okay to take him here. And he does correlate with Mike Williams, who I selected back in the 4th round. Chargers and the Broncos play in championship week this year.
Yeah, I mean, the one other group chat that I'm in with Brian and the other co-founder of Occupy Waleed, he's done a ton of high stakes fantasy football drafts, best ball drafts, managed drafts. I think one of his highest exposed running backs that he's been touting last couple of weeks in there is Monte Davis, and so or Javonte Williams. Sorry, I was reading something else, and uh, yeah. So he's super high on him. Loves that whole team. So yeah, definitely love to get some exposure there.
Pat Fryermuth comes off the board. All right. Pick 100 on the dot here in the 9th round. Hmm. Well, I guess I'm
Let's see.
going to be building out a little bit more Buffalo. I haven't selected James Cook just yet this season, but this is a little behind his
Okay.
ADP. Got a couple of Buffalo Bills players now, and I do think, once again, that Patriots Bills game is one I want exposure to in championship week. So I'm happy to have that here.
And I was going to ask actually, why did you? I'm curious. Why did you pass on Michael Thomas there?
This is one of those news feel things, right? How
Yeah.
long has it been since we've seen Michael Thomas be the Michael Thomas that we remember in our minds? I don't think
Yeah.
that guy is there anymore. I feel like this price, same with his teammate at the running back position, Alvin Kamara, with some uncertainty, I guess, with a legal
Hmm.
situation he's going through. I want to draft players that I feel good about contributing to their teams all season long. Kamara, I don't
Yeah.
know if he's even going to be available to begin the season. Thomas, this nagging ankle thing over the last couple of years has been a real problem. So I guess no real news driven reason that I'm off Thomas entirely, but he's on my do not draft list right now, I guess is what I would say. So a good value at this point, but not one that I am willing to back with my dollars personally.
Yeah. I mean, that makes perfect sense. Again, it's one of those things where you have a logical reason to avoid someone or to take someone. You take those stands. That's going to help you if that call is correct.
There are other receivers in that receiver room that I think came on strong at the end of the season that probably have a good chance to contribute. Obviously, Olave is the
Mhm.
primary one. We've got Rashid Shaheed, who came on strong last year. There's a couple of tight ends, Taysom Hill and Juwan Johnson, that are really good assets in that offense. So I just Michael Thomas is not someone I'm interested in this year. And if Michael Thomas ends up being the player you need to win contests this year, I'm just willing to say GG. I don't want any. I don't want any Michael Thomas this year. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. 100%. You mentioned Shaheed. That's somebody that I am actually super high on as well. In later rounds, he's one of those guys. I think that if he gets his 1, 2 catches and a touchdown, that's all you need from a wide receiver 3 or a flex spot that can get you in there in those playoff rounds. That he's super high air yards, super long targets. A guy that I would love to have on any best ball playoff team.
one of those plays that we love in daily fantasy sports. That's like a cheap play to get into your lineup in a game stack. Shaheed, the player that he's most similar in my mind, just strictly from a fantasy football standpoint. This isn't like a film analysis take or anything like that. But you hit on the deep targets. How he doesn't need a ton of opportunities to hit a ceiling. It's MVS, Valdez Scantling, who's
Yeah.
previously of the Packers, now with the Chiefs. Very, very similar, high ADOT player. I love getting any of those guys on my roster, but Shaheed is someone I'm also pretty heavily exposed to already, frankly. But just given the way that this roster is shaking out, definitely someone I might try to target when he comes around in 13th, 14th round is right around his range. So we'll see how things go from here.
It's funny you mentioned MVS. It's also another player that I'm high on as well. I have quite a bit of exposure on him too.
I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing that we like a lot of the same players. At least what it does communicate is that we are on the same page when we put our NFL rankings, our NFL stuff out, whether it's for best ball or for the daily stuff that a lot of our users are used to. A very, very big team effort on kind of the content that takes the analysis that we put out. And usually, with this stuff, we're new to offering best ball content this year, but we always have a very active staff chat where we're trying to come to a consensus on things when we do, in fact, put something out that we don't necessarily agree with. So just know that, I guess, as kind of the viewers running the stream back or watching live, we are constantly talking about this stuff at disgusting dates, times, hours, pretty much all year long. It's quite a ride.
If you saw the timestamps on the messages, you would either sign up again or you would cancel very quickly.
Say, oh my God, what are these guys doing? Yeah. All right.
After this pick, I do want to pick your brain about one thing here. So who are you thinking about picking up next on the clock?
I'm gonna go with Juju Smith-Schuster. Behind ADP, one of my favorite players to select in best ball this season, one of my highest exposed players. Direct replacement from an opportunity standpoint, I think, for Jacoby Myers, who left the Patriots this past season, and got some correlation with Gabriel Davis and James Cook in Week 17.
Okay, nice. But yeah, I was going to ask. So with some of these players that are going high up, the big one that comes to mind, Dalvin Cook, free agent, not signed to a team yet. For players, at least this early, are you taking any stands with them? Are you just saying, I'm waiting till he signs with the team to see who he signs with? Because we had a pretty big talk about that, and I'm on the fence of, they're not on the team, I'm not picking them. That might be a very noob thing to say, but they got to be on a team to score points.
Yeah, I'm not interested in selecting definitely DeAndre Hopkins at cost. Cook, a little easier to justify, but I'm waiting for them to go behind their ADP by a significant amount, almost a full round, before I'm considering it. We're on the same wavelength there. We're trying to, it's somewhat of a fool's errand to try to predict what a full season's amount of results are going to be like. We have a pretty good sense for how these offensive coordinators are going to use their talented players on their roster.
Yeah.
We don't know what roster these two players are going to land on and how they're going to disrupt things. So they may disrupt things that we're already drafting, sure, but I'd rather focus on the things that I can predict a little bit better. And right now, that's the players that are actually on teams. So we are 100% in agreement there. I got a 0, 3, 6, 1. Hold on a second. I got to make a pick here. All right. I am going to go ahead and select Jamal Williams. This is not a player that I have selected yet, but I did need my Saints exposure, and that gets me some correlation with the Rams, with the Saints. And now I've got 4 running backs, Moose, that I do feel pretty good about. I might take like 1 to 2 more and focus on a couple of wide receivers that correlate with the teams that I'm building out. A backup tight end, because I think when you select someone like Andrews, you probably don't want to go more than 2 tight ends, and probably hit some quarterbacks that correlate with my receivers.
I was going to say the same thing, That makes sense.
So you had a point you were trying to make, though, before I cut you off there, so please feel free to go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. What about like players super deep in the rounds. Like another one that comes to mind is Zeke. At 15, round 15 or so, could you see yourself stretching for players like that? You know that he's got the workhorse in him. He can score, he can get points, and for people around his ADP, if he gets even as a split backup role, you know what you can get from him. I think that reaching for guys that late can make a difference.
So Ezekiel Elliott going around the pick 177 right now, Moose. That means he's going right around Raheem Mostert, who's in sort of a three-headed monster backfield with the Dolphins.
Mhm.
Chuba Hubbard with the Carolina Panthers, back up to Miles Sanders there, competing with a couple of other players. Gus Edwards with the Ravens. I guess even though the uncertainty is still there with where Elliott could land, the question is really, can he outscore these players no matter where he
Mhm.
lands? And obviously the answer in an upside scenario is yes. We know Elliott can be a
Yeah.
starter. Another player like this is Leonard Fournette. He's still available around pick
Yeah.
200, a little bit later. So I am interested in those guys. I will say I don't actively think of them as I'm going through my rankings because, to the point we were talking about a few minutes ago, they're not on rosters, so I don't even have them in my rankings right now.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a leak in my process that I need to plug potentially. But I do feel like those guys have upside. Last year there was a player, I think it was Deion Jackson with the Indianapolis Colts, who ended up starting a handful of games for them, was a
Yeah.
target machine, was someone that we loved on DraftKings and FanDuel. I mean, uh, Ezekiel Elliott, Leonard Fournette, these are players that have more pedigree than a player like that. But I guess the reason I go to Deion Jackson is if a player like that can crack, the top rankings at a position weekly if they get the opportunity, then yeah, obviously, clearly,
Mhm.
Elliott, Fournette, obviously they cost more, but Dalvin Cook, they can do the same
Yeah.
thing. It's really hard to see where those opportunities are going to come from today. But we do know those opportunities are going to come, and that's kind of a hard thing with these contests and drafting in July.
Yeah, it's very tough, and I'm very curious again how their ADP is going to change when they do get drafted to a team, if they do get drafted. But actually, in chat here, Griffin has a question for us. He says, "I got offered Amon Ra 2024, 2025 second for AJ Brown, Damian Pierce. What do you guys think?"
You got offered, okay, a dynasty question, I assume, is what this sounds like. But he's getting Amon-Ra St. Brown and 2 first-round picks for A.J. Brown and Damian Pierce. Is that
Yeah,
the,
that's what it
the
sounds like.
question?
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
probably do that personally. I love A.J.
Yeah.
Brown. Damian Pierce, I'm a little lower on this year. Not a running back that basically his performance last year, Moose, was based off of the volume of opportunity in the backfield as far as carries go. Didn't see a ton of targets. And they did just bring in Devin Singletary previously of the Bills to compete. So we may have already seen the best of Damian Pierce that we're ever going to see.
Mhm.
Might be very similar to a few years back, James Robinson with the Jaguars. Like Pierce is a player I'm trying to get value for at this point if I own him in those types of settings, because I just don't see him continuing to be a high-end contributor. I could be wrong, but that's my read on that
Mhm.
situation.
Okay,
So why did
that
I
makes
just
sense.
take Tyler Higbee there? Obviously, we didn't talk about it. I am trying to stack the Los Angeles Rams, and even though I have Mark Andrews already, I love Tyler Higbee. I think he's probably removing the position, the second best pass catcher on the Rams to pair with Cup and hopefully his quarterback here if he's available when it comes back to me.
Yeah, I love that pick too. Yeah, anytime you get a player that you can stack and they're around ADP and you like them. I mean, that's the trifecta right there. Right, let's see here. So you got Higby. I'm just trying to look at who else we can target next. Um, so are you gonna go? Actually, I'll wait to hear until we're actually on the clock. I'm curious who you're gonna take next.
I don't
I'm pretty
think
sure who it is.
Yeah, I don't think the field. I mean, we've seen weird things happen. I don't think the field is a
Yeah,
tremendous reason, especially with these two guys going before me already having quarterbacks, for
yeah,
these guys to be interested in Matthew Stafford. But I am going to take Matthew Stafford here to just lock down the 3-1
yeah.
stack with the Rams and the Giants. Get Matthew Stafford, Cooper Cup, Tyler Higbee, and then Saquon Barkley, bringing that back. I think if we were playing daily fantasy and running that as a stack, we'd feel very good about that. Now I'm going to be running it for the whole season on this roster. So hopefully we see the Rams stay healthy and look more like the team that won the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. That's obviously the thesis of this team here.
Yeah, I thank you. I appreciate that. That was just what I wanted to hear. But no, they were a great team that year, and we see what they could do. So yeah, I love it. I love the stack. Now that you've hit your stack, I've always run into this question. I love hearing everyone's view on it. Is how much stack is too much stack? Like, obviously, you don't want to go 7 players from one team. You're losing out on points somewhere. But so I'm curious, is this okay with you? Are you just not going to draft any more Rams?
Yeah.
Or like, will you take a chance at wide receiver 5 or 6 later down the road to see if they'll get somebody?
I think three players from the same team is enough. We had a question about this in Discord last night about the Jaguars, and Chuck answered it, I think, very, very well. If it's not one of these offenses that we know is going to be extremely high upside, like the Chiefs or the Bills to a lesser degree, I think four players, even for those offenses, Moose, is probably a little too much. So if we think back that about the best consensus teams, the teams in the second tier and below, it's probably a bad idea to go more than 3 players. Yeah. So had I not taken Tyler Higbee, yeah, I would be looking at, Van Jefferson or any of the other kind of Rams players that stand out here. But I think I feel pretty good about the way that I have built my roster here for that particular stack. And I really think, just to, I guess, to tie a bow around the point, other than the Chiefs, I guess is really the team, I'm probably not going to go much further than 2 teammates with a quarterback. Yeah. I think that's probably even true without the quarterback. I think, for example, I have 2 Buffalo Bills on this roster. I probably don't want another one because I'm sort of, with my selections here, I am betting on the outcome where those are the best correlated players to have outside of Josh Allen. I want them to do well. If I have too many Buffalo Bills players on my roster, that means obviously I'm taking some zeros. Obviously, not every player is going to start every single week, but I want to maximize my opportunity at points. And we know that there's a zero-sum kind of outcome here where, if Tyler Higbee's scoring 2 touchdowns, then Van Jefferson's probably not, right? So that's kind of where that comes from.
Yeah, and that's something that I would love to see. I was in the process of trying to build something like that where you have some sort of, I know Football Guys has the Draft Dominator with their rankings. You can put your own rankings, and it tells you kind of who to pick, and it like based off how everyone else is drafting, it learns and tells you who you should pick. I would love to see something like that with best ball where you're tracking correlation. You could put some sort of like correlation coefficient, and it'll say, oh, this Rams player is great, but then after you pick them, don't pick any more Rams, and it just makes their ranking 0 basically. And so kind of some sort of like, yeah, I don't know how you would make that. I would have to really spend some time and thought, but some sort of like live,
it's like a dynamic draft tool. Yeah, you'd almost have to have it. Free idea for the people. If anybody's a really good engineer out there, we just gave that one away for free. So, okay, I need probably a couple more receivers. Definitely need at least 1 more quarterback. I'm done with tight end. I'm not worried about that whatsoever. I'm hammering this particular player over and over and over and over again in this spot. So I really hope now that I've built it up that he's still there in about 7 seconds. He is. Kenny Gainwell with the Philadelphia Eagles, getting steamed up a little bit, admittedly, around the industry. He's already gone, isn't he? So there we go. I did want a running back here. Did not do a great job of tracking things on my end. But if we are thinking about situations where players have a chance to be one of the highest scoring players on the board, if there's an injury situation, is there a better backfield that like to be invested in the RB2 at this point in the draft than the Tennessee Titans, Moose? This is a offense that is already like severely, I think, what am I trying to say here in the nicest way possible? They're playing at a significant disadvantage in the passing game to a lot of their peers in the NFL. They don't have a lot of high upside weapons. So this is a team that's going to have to run the football. And if anything happens to King Henry, Tyjae Spears, this rookie that they just drafted, is probably the
Yeah.
most likely player to benefit from that. So it's not a player that, from any math related reason, here in round 14, I'm like, oh, he's a steal. He's going to be the best running back in this range. It's one of those news driven things where if we get a
Yeah.
certain outcome this season, he contributes to my roster, and I'm at a significant advantage against the other 11 players in this pool because they, hopefully, for my
Mhm.
sake, they don't have that kind of upside out of round 14, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, looking at the Titans roster, if you look at the passing game, is I nearly just threw up looking at it. So I not very good. And also, here's the take that I don't know how much weight you'd put on it, if even any. These teams that, potentially could get eliminated from the playoffs, got nothing to play for. Maybe during the playoff weeks, maybe they give Spears a couple extra touches. Maybe they give him some goal line work. Maybe that gives you a couple extra points that can help you out in the playoff weeks. So someone who's doesn't necessarily have something to play for, then that
Right.
that can help you out.
Like maybe just in general to what you're saying here, um, like maybe they ease Derrick Henry's workload, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of ways Spears can contribute. Running back scoring touchdowns definitely helps things for sure. I just feel like I have no wide receiver that correlates with Derek Carr, but I just feel like he's hung around too long. And this is one of those things that can
Okay.
happen in a dynamic contest like this. I am interested in Saints players. There's a semifinals week correlation with the Rams. I've obviously already got my Ram stack
Mhm.
built out, but Derek Carr goes around pick 145, getting him more than 25 picks later. I'm going to do that here. So I feel pretty good about my two quarterbacks now on this roster.
Yeah, it's always weird because I'll do a best ball draft real early in the morning, and then I'll see somebody who's 20, 30, 40 picks without pick, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm searching their name on Twitter. Did I
Right,
miss some
exactly.
news
What news did
overnight?
I
Is
miss?
this
What's
person?
going on here?
Yeah,
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 but I
yeah,
don't think that's the
and
case here with Derek Carr. I just think you get late in the contest, and most people that are pretty good at consuming the content that we're putting out, but we're realistic that everyone's putting out in fantasy land. They know that going more than two quarterbacks is probably a little too much in certain builds. So every once in a
Mhm.
while, one of these established starters that's, for lack of better terminology, kind of mid, they do fall a little bit because nobody really feels like they need them on their team. So me only having the one
Mhm.
quarterback so far, I'm more than happy to take Carr here after ADP.
Exactly, yeah. And something that's interesting, the guy that picked after you with Mustard, I'm curious your take on that backfield. Are you picking anybody from there? Is there someone you trust over someone else? There's also some rumors about trades. So I'm curious to get your take on it.
I have been taking a lot of, I had been taking, excuse me, a lot of Jeff Wilson before Dalvin Cook was released and all this steam about the Dolphins kind of kicked up with him. I'm not drafting anyone in this backfield actively at this point, but if we go with what we can safely, not safely, if we go off of what is on the roster right now, a chain, Mostert,
Mhm.
and Jeff Wilson, I do feel like that's a three-headed monster that they'll all have spike weeks throughout the season. If they introduce Dalvin Cook to
Okay.
that, obviously that's going to be a complete disaster. So I guess what I'm saying is if it stays as is consensus-wise with those three players, I'm fine with paying the least amount that I have to get exposure to it. Right now, that is Jeff
Yeah.
Wilson. So I guess if you are taking one, that is one of the higher upside backs, I think, here in the last 3 or 4 rounds of the draft I'm most interested in.
Okay. Yeah, I'm curious. Always curious to hear about the split backs. It's the same thing, almost kind of like with the Commanders, with Gibson and Robinson. So yeah, I feel like for me at least, just take the shorter end of the stick, person you can get later in the draft with, uh, and
And
hope that it works
obviously,
out. So
Moneybags here is definitely watching the show because they slammed Jeff Wilson after I just gassed him up. So that was good to see. Okay, closing out the draft
And he
pretty
took back
strongly
Zeke.
here. Yeah, yeah. I feel pretty good about the way that I've built this roster out. I don't see
Mhm.
any direct player that I want to pair with Derek Carr, so I'm not necessarily going to reach for it um, because I think at a certain point, correlating for the sake of correlation is a mistake.
Yeah.
I've seen Rashid Shaheed's gone, both tight ends, Taysom Hill, Juwan Johnson are gone, Chris Olave, Michael Thomas gone. Yeah, there are other players on the Saints that certainly could contribute here, Moose, but I'm not gonna take like, hold on, let me go way, 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 way down in my rankings here just to get an example. Like, I'm not
You
gonna
pick like
draft
Kiki
someone like
Kuti.
Brian Edwards. Oh
Yeah.
my God, Traquan Smith. Like these are players that probably have roles uh, in showdown contests in DFS land. But like, I just feel
Mhm.
like putting them on my roster here is a wasted pick at this point. I'd rather take someone that just in general is more likely to score some points.
Yeah, I mean anything over 0 is great because correlation times 0 is still 0. So I'd rather have players that score points, which I'm sure Derek, our social media guy, will clip this as I've said it probably 5 or 6 times. I just want players to score points, and players on teams score points. So uh, yeah, I definitely don't don't I would not reach in these late rounds.
So a player on a team that should score some points this year got a $10 million contract, roughly. Veteran wide receiver Robert Woods with the Houston Texans. I had no real
Okay.
reason to be considering him until I took Tyjae Spears, but there are two games between the Texans and the
Mm.
Titans in week 15 and in week 17. So I like double dipping there for some correlation here late in the draft.
Yeah, that's always a good thing to see when you on a stack seeker. You're like, oh, I should have 4 teams, my team, and then the 3 opponents. And you're like, oh, they play each other twice. Even better. Let's go. And then, but then that also sucks if you get sniped. It's like, oh crap, that's even less players for me to pivot off to.
So Beard back here just took Noah Gray, the backup tight end with Kansas City. He's got Patrick Mahomes, so I do see why he considered that, but that was his third tight end. Interesting. All right, we'll get back to that in a second here. I think that's a team specific thing that only he would have considered to do here, because if anything happens to Travis Kelce, obviously he's in really, really good position. Moose, because you are here on the
Yeah,
show and we talked about this extensively, I'm going to do you a solid. I'm going to take Chase Brown from your Cincinnati Bengals as my sixth running back.
there we
And if
go.
anything happens to Joe Mixon, Moose, this is the guy that we think is going to benefit the most, right?
100%. Yeah. I mean, where do you think? Let's say Mixon can't get the contract and he leaves. What do you think his ADP shoots up to? I'm just
Mixon
curious.
is a fifth round pick at this point,
All
right?
right, no,
And if we,
yeah, Chase Brown's ADP.
well, that's where I was going with this.
Yeah, yeah,
Mixon
okay.
being a fifth round pick, right? I know it's
Mhm.
hard to separate out the player that we have in our minds and what they've done in the past with the price for the team and the position. But what fantasy football players are telling us with this ADP for Mixon Moose is that the starting running back for the Cincinnati Bengals, one of the best teams in the NFL, is worth this price. A
Yeah,
little bit of uncertainty, obviously, that Brown will get all of that if Mixon leaves the team. But I would think we would see Brown shoot definitely into the top 100, if not higher, as the
yeah,
de facto starting running back should something like that happen. So to get him at pick 196 here on July 9th, if by August 9th he's a starting running back, I'm going to look back at my exposures and see that as probably one of the best value picks I made all summer.
yeah, exactly. And it'll be because of me. You're welcome.
I appreciate it. We will, if we do well with this team, obviously we will discuss your contribution and your share of the winnings for sure. I'm more than okay with that. All right, I got to make one more pick here on this roster. I've got a 2-6-7-2 going, a very traditional build. I am not I'm probably going to look for another high upside wide receiver to close out the draft, but feel very
Okay.
good about what I did here today with my game stack with the Rams and the New York Giants. I will say, obviously, it's not always possible to get the ideal draft. Back in or in June, I put out some strategy videos on the Occupy Fantasy YouTube channel on how to, I guess,
Mhm.
mentally prepare yourself for picking from any slot that you get when you enter one of these contests. ADP has moved a
Mhm.
little bit since those videos came out, Moose, but I still think for anyone that's hungry for some best ball content from us, I think those still have some value here as far as orienting yourselves for picking from pick four, like I did today. So I do highly encourage everybody to check that out. The other piece of business we definitely got to take care of before we get out of here, Moose. If you haven't signed up for Underdog Fantasy already, it's a really awesome platform. We love playing best ball, but there's a lot of different contests you can take advantage of. You can sign up today using promo code Occupy. You'll get a
Mhm.
100% match on your first deposit up to $100. That means you can use that promo code Occupy, deposit $100, get an additional $100 to start playing with $200 today. Best Ball Mania 4, chance to win $3 million at the end of it all. Really, this is the best contest I think available on the board for season long
Yeah.
players to be considering with that kind of prize pool out there. Really, really happy to be talking more about it this year.
Yeah, I mean, even if you use the bonus just for the best ball mania, you're like, hey, I really don't feel comfortable doing this. I want to do pick'ems or I want to do the weekly winners.
Mhm.
You can do that. But yeah, I mean, for 3 million to first, if you can get bonus money by doing it, use the bonus money, get the 25, use 25 for an entry here. And hey, that's all you need is one entry, right?
I do like the way you think. Only one entry is all you need to take it down. Obviously, more entries will give you a better chance of getting
Yeah.
there. That's what we've all talked ourselves into. All right, to round things out, I am going to take a player that I was high on the very, very beginning of the draft season with Chuck when we did some of our first shows. I've got a lot of this player, Richie James Jr., formerly of the New York Giants, now going to be competing for some of the slot reps that were vacated by Juju Smith-Schuster, who's also on this roster I drafted when he went to the
Mhm.
Patriots. So rounding out this draft in round 17 and 18, Moose, with Chase Brown and Richie James Jr. to get exposure to that Week 17 matchup between the Chiefs and the Bengals. I feel really good about this team we built today.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the better teams I've seen you build. I don't know if it's because of me or because of the pressure
You can
of
take all the credit.
people
That is
online.
more than okay. I love sharing credit
No,
with
I
people.
love
So
this team, and
um,
I will say it's always nice to get different people's exposures and just kind of pick their brain while we're doing it. You know, I've been on a couple shows with Chuck. I've done some of my own drafts. I've and some other chats as well. But always curious to just get in the knee deep things, hash them out, see how it all works out. And I love the team you built.
Moose, thank you for joining me this afternoon. Really appreciate it. Folks, we will be back. I got to sort out the schedule with our team of NFL contributors, but either Wednesday or Thursday for our next Best Ball live stream. So keep an eye out for the scheduled live shows on the YouTube channel. You want to make sure you're subscribed to the channel to get the alert when we put that out there. And of course, as always, give us a thumbs up on the video if you enjoyed the stream today. Moose, you can take us away.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, if you enjoyed it, definitely hit the like. That's definitely the best thing you can do. Go ahead and follow us, Occupy Fantasy, on Twitter. I think we're gonna have a thread account soon, whatever that means.
Mm.
Derek told me to say that. And we have our Discord, occupyfantasy.com/Discord. We have an Underdog channel on there, just chatting it up, sweat some sports with us. But until next time, Moose and Chris from Occupy Fantasy. Have a good night.